Welcome to the Habitat Podcast, the podcast for wildlife habitat management, hunting strategy, and land stewardship. And now, your host, Jared Van Hees.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Habitat Podcast, the podcast for becoming better habitat managers. As always, I'm your host, Jared Van Hees. Glad to have you all back listening. Thank you so much for tuning in once again. We have a great episode for you here. If you haven't heard on our social media, we have a new partner on board, Sound Barrier Hunting. Now, today we have Adam Lewis, one of the owners in Sound Barrier Hunting, on the podcast. And what Sound Barrier Hunting is all about, it's protective gear for noise on anything that you carry out into the woods with you, whether it be tree stands, climbing sticks, camera arms, anything metal. He makes some really great products called Buck Bumper and Buck Bumper Thick that we're going to talk about here on this show. We're going to talk about how to prep some of your stands right now. I know it could be a little bit of a break in between spring habitat work and fall food plots. I know I'm not on break. I still have too much stuff to do, but if you are wondering what you could be doing right now, checking out your stands and soundproofing them for this fall is a great thing to look at. So we're going to get into that on this episode. We also talk about access through different types of habitat for us habitat managers in the hunting woods this fall. We talk about public land hunting. We talk about deer hearing and the way that deer use their ears and the sound frequencies that come along with that, which is super interesting stuff. So a lot to take in, guys. Grab your pen and paper and get ready for another great episode. Adam over at Sound Barrier has offered a 10% discount with free shipping if you use the code HP over at soundbarrierhunting.com. I want to be sure I get that discount out there for you guys. All right, next, Packer Max Call to Packers. Lincoln Roan has moved his location. He has his own building in Rockford, Michigan. He still ships all over the country via, the mail service or UPS, I think it is. So check him out at packermax.com. We also covered in our trivia that Lincoln is coming out with a roller crimper add-on. So a crimper add-on to the Packer Max units. Be sure to check out our Facebook trivia that happened 2 nights ago on July 9th. So that's still on our Facebook. And then, packermax.com. Be sure to mention the Habitat Podcast and you'll get $25 off every Packer on there. So thank you, Lincoln, for supporting the show. And we'll have Lincoln on next week or the week after, one of the two, to discuss ways to protect your food plots from deer. I'm sure we'll get into more on his new crimper project then. I'd like to thank 5-2 Outdoors, Michigan Whitetail Pursuit, Killer Food Plots, the Habitat Hook, and Stony Creek Realty, along with the HuntWise hunting app, all for supporting our show. I know we have a discount with Killer Food Plots, HP 10% on killerfoodplots.com. We'll get you 10% off and free shipping as well. And I actually want to correct myself. The Sound Barrier code is only HP. You don't need the 10%. It's HP. So I had that mixed up with Killer Food Plots. Either way, guys, we're trying to get you guys some discounts on some of our gear from our sponsors. Check that out. That's $25 off Packer Max. HP 10% for 10% and free shipping at Killer Food Plots, and Sound Barrier Outdoors code HP, and you get 10% off and free shipping on any of their products. Now, we've been being pretty active on our social media. If you don't follow us online yet, it'd be wonderful if you did. Check us out on Instagram at Habitat Podcast, Facebook, Habitat Podcast. We're on YouTube uploading videos pretty regularly. And then, habitatpodcast.com. You can find all of our info on there about, every podcast episode, all of our hats and gear that are on there, and even everything you want to know about our land plan services. We've been really busy this summer working on land plans for clients, Kentucky, Iowa, Michigan, upstate New York, all over the place. So if you guys are interested in those, check us out at habitatpodcast.com. Go to land plans and submit your information, and we will get right back to you. All right, guys, that's enough about us and the podcast. Let's get into Adam Lewis with Sound Barrier Hunting. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Another episode of the Habitat Podcast. We have my co-host, Brian Hallbly, on the line, and a special guest tonight, Adam Lewis from Sound Barrier Hunting. How you doing, Adam?
Good. How you guys doing?
Doing well. How about you, Brian?
Doing great. Thanks for coming on, Adam.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Brian, I think I heard him crack his third bushel over there. No, just messing with you. Adam, as you know, we normally like to start these things off hearing about who you are, where you're from, your background in hunting and habitat. You mind starting there for us?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a Michigan guy, grew up in Michigan, grew up hunting in Michigan, which a lot of your listeners probably are from, that general area, but probably have guys from all around the country. But Michigan, being one of the higher pressure states, one of the harder ones to hunt. So I grew up hunting here, and that's where I mainly hunt, which is been about 28 years now that I've hunted, and started out hunting a lot of private growing up. In the last 10 years or so, I've hunted mainly public land here in mid-Michigan, and probably about the last 8 years or so, I've hunted also in Ohio. So that's, I guess, most of my history with hunting, and I'd say I've learned a ton probably the last 10 years that I've hunted public, just exponentially, I think, from that. But in about the last 4 years, is when we launched the company Sound Barrier, really based around problems that I've had hunting and trying to find solutions for those.
Very nice. Now, where in Michigan are you from?
I grew up in, kind of the Lapeer area, and now I'm a little west of there. I work up near Saginaw, so I'm kind of right in the middle.
Yeah, okay. And when you're heading down to Ohio, you said you've been doing that for, 7 or 8 years, you said?
Yep, 7, 8 years. Started down there in public, and then did a lot of door knocking and stuff, and got a little bit of private access as well. So that's pretty much Central Ohio is where I hunt down there too.
Okay, awesome. And when did you decide to start this company exactly, and what made you, tell me about the problem you had where it made you start this company?
Yeah, so public land hunting especially made me really aware of, and most guys know this, even first starting out, you find out pretty quick that you can't really make mistakes with whitetails. And really through making mistakes and frustrations, realized that I had a long way to go when I was first getting into it, and really centered around noise I made. So hunting, especially public land, I was getting in thick stuff. I was getting close to bedding, and realized that little noises I made, even if they weren't like major errors, but any little thing that I did that made noise would negatively affect my hunts and really hurt me. And you go through all this effort, and especially the guys that are really into their food plots and all that stuff. I mean, that's a year-round thing, and a lot of guys are doing scouting all year, and so you're putting all this effort into it, and then one little mistake when you're out hunting can totally ruin a season, and that's what I was finding, And so it was that problem of noise I made with my equipment, like clanging on stuff, brush, whatever, or just equipment, really unavoidable things, like you clang your release against your bow, or your stand when you're setting it up there's metal on metal contact, and even coming and going normally, you're making noise. And so that was the big problem I had that I knew was hurting, my chances, my success was really busting a lot of my hunts before I even got started with them. I was making some errors and they were hurting me. So long story short, that got me into thinking about, the sound aspect of it. I started doing a lot of research around products, and there really aren't.
Adam, one second here. Before you go into there, I have one quick question. Are you are you fully mobile the whole time when you're down there on that public land? Are you bringing a climber? Tell us about your setup a little bit and kind of the terrain that you're hunting on, how, it wasn't just a flat walk, it sounds like.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I do a lot of different stuff. I'll put in sets, with the old climbing stick, big one you stick together, and a stand, and leave up those. I'll go in. I have a climber I use as well. I have sticks, the mobile sticks like Lone Wolf sticks, and a Lone Wolf stand that I use too. And this year I'm starting out with a saddle too. So I have a lot of different things I use. But it didn't really seem to matter. There's always opportunity, it seemed, to make noise, and that's kind of where that stemmed from.
So, Adam, how did you come up with the idea to start researching sounds like you mentioned and what you could do about it?
Yeah, so given the problem, I had some product ideas, and so that's kind of what spawned the research. I wanted to know how deer heard, really know the science behind it. Was it as big as a problem as I felt? How far do these noises I make, whether it be crunching leaves or stepping on a branch or clanging, some of my metal gear, how far is that really traveling? How are deer hearing that? Is that really as big a deal as I felt it was? Like, I had this intuition, that it obviously was, but I wanted to know the science, right? So I did some research. There's some different studies out there through the University of Toledo about deer hearing. And then I wound up actually doing some studies at the University of Toledo on hunter noises, where we went to the soundproof booth. We recorded about 30 different common sounds like crunching leaves, breaking branches, different types of metal contacts. We looked at the frequency range of those. We then were able to we measured, the intensity, or, in decibels, how loud it was. And then you can project pretty easily how far that sound travels. And so that research, kind of verified how bad it is, and also, learning about how deer actually do hear, which is different than how we hear. And so all that solidified, it's a major problem, obviously. And so that kind of led into the product development of how can I eliminate these sounds and give myself a better chance? How can I eliminate these mistakes that I'm making that, most hunters are making, or all hunters are making, and give myself a fighting chance? And so that's kind of what led into that, led into the product development, led into, starting the company Sound Barrier.
Okay. So for our listeners that might not be familiar with your product, can you walk us through what exactly it is and how it's applied?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a complicated product. We have a couple of different ones. One is a thinner wrap, which on one side, it is self-adhesive. You can peel it easily like tape, but there's a sound absorbent layer in there with a camo top, and you can wrap pretty much anything. So I'll take, for example, my Lone Wolf climbing sticks, and I'll completely wrap the whole thing so there's no metal exposed. So it's literally impossible to clang it and have metal on metal contact. So it completely soundproofs it. So that's the thin version we call buck bumper. And you can cut it to shape. Like, I'll put it on buckles. You can cut it real easily and stick it on. It's a permanent adhesive. It sticks real well, and it soundproofs things like buckles, or I'll even put it on my bow in different areas that know that I typically clank something. Camera arms, wrapping those, so one of them is a wrap that just real easily, it's thin, but it soundproofs real well, and you can pretty much wrap and cover anything with it. The other one is a thicker version. It's a little more absorbent, a little more soundproofing, but it's more for just flat surfaces. So if you've got, the edge of blinds where you're putting your gun up, it will soundproof that. Shooting rails. I use it a lot, for example, underneath my stand, where you fold your stand up, it's always metal on metal. I put it on contact points so there's no, metal on metal contact there. And you can really just hit any spot you need to soundproof, a wide variety of gear. It's, some of the stuff that's out there, you have that the fuzzy moleskin type stuff that's fairly popular. And we tested against that and just, that works okay. I started with wrapping stuff with like hockey tape and that helps a little. But we designed ours with a material that is designed for sound absorbing. And so that's what it does. And it just reduces the vibration in the contact better than the other stuff that's out there.
Okay. So how did you come up with the material that's on the final product now? Did you have different materials you were testing, and how did you come to that conclusion?
Yeah, we did different variations, with the different product testing. It's a foam-based product. It's closed-cell foam-based product, so it won't absorb water. That's something we wanted. We wanted it not only to absorb sound, but we wanted it to be light, so it wouldn't add weight to people's gear. And so, we went through several different variations, but the closed-cell foam variation that has a cloth, it also has a cloth top on it, just seemed to work the best. It did what we needed to as far as the sound absorbing, but it also was easy to wrap, the certain size of it and all that. So there was testing that went into it, but the material itself, it has been around a while. It's designed for sound absorption, where other things, aren't necessarily designed for that. They kind of work, but that isn't their, I guess, design, engineering wise.
Okay. So did this start out as just a hobby, trying to solve some problems for yourself, or did you envision it to become a company someday?
Yeah, we kind of started out, I have a few partners, and we started out with the idea of a company and filling this need, because really, if you think about, the industry, which has really, I'd say the last 5 years really gone heavily toward, the last 20 years, there's been a lot of the food plot stuff, right?
Sure.
And then I'd say the latest revolution, so to say, has been to these hardcore DIY guys, these, run and gun type setup guys.
Right.
But there's really, if you look at the industry as a whole, there's really nothing centered around deer hearing. And so that market is really not been touched that much. And especially as we started this company, there was nobody really in that space to speak of. And we knew it wasn't a need. We knew we could help hunters. We knew we could fill a big need. Because if you think about it, most of the stuff that's out there, you have three senses that can keep you from success. They got sight, they got scent, smell, and they have hearing. And the scent, smell category has been hit death with products and companies and all that. And so is the Camel, right? The eyesight thing, but there isn't much around the hearing part. So we knew that was obviously a need, and something we could kind of fill. So that's what we kind of envisioned was us filling that space.
Okay, that's interesting. And you mentioned a couple of uses for it. Could you go into some more details about what we can use it on, and maybe even some things that you wouldn't recommend us putting it on?
Yeah, I mean, really, the sky's the limit. I mean, as creative as you want to be, you can soundproof it. And I'll say this, all products have their place, and I don't think there's any one product, maybe other than your weapon, that is a absolute need to kill a deer. But when you start getting serious about it, you realize that there's a lot of things, these little details add up. And this is one of those little details that I found, can really make or break a season. If you say this is good enough, you get out on the stand, you clank something, and pretty soon all that work you put in all year, you just totally blew it. Because it just takes one interaction like that to a deer, for a deer to know it's being hunted, and change their behavior and patterns, and they're gone. So it's one of those really detail-oriented things that can make a huge difference. But some uses, like I said, a lot of guys use it on climbing sticks, the mobile type climbing sticks. You can completely encase those. If guys have a camera arm, film their hunts, the camera arm is a huge opportunity to clang it. As you're moving it around up there, you got your release on, all this motion going on trying to film. Soundproofing that can save that costly mistake. Buckles, even on like climbing harnesses, those buckles that, any exposed metal, you can hit it with your bow or something like that. And I've done it. I even did it last year. I had this buckle that I hadn't silenced, my fault, and I moved my bow and it hit that buckle as a deer was coming in, and that deer, I never saw it. I could hear it coming, but I never saw it because it heard that noise. So any of those little things, those are things to analyze and even think about before season. What things could I make noise with that if a deer heard that, it could ruin a hunt? And those things, you either need to get rid of them if you don't really need them in your setup, or soundproof them. So, stands, shooting rails, buckles, any exposed metal or plastic or things that will make those noises, guys put it on, and it can, again, be that last little detail that can make or break a season.
Yeah, it's interesting you put it that way, because a lot of times I'll get in some discussions with some guys and they'll say, "What are you doing that for? That only give you maybe a 1% chance." Well, I'll take that. You add up enough of those 1%, and next thing you know, you got a nice buck in front of you and everything goes right for a change.
Yeah, there's way too many. There's way too many possibilities to make mistakes. The odds are really stacked against us, especially if we were trying to shoot a mature buck, something that's 3 years or older. The odds are really stacked against us. So we can't, at least I don't want to take gambles with having a bunch of things potentially that could go wrong. I want to minimize those things as much as possible, and that gives me the best possible chance when I'm out hunting. Because, we've all been there, but if we think that, oh yeah, I'm a good enough hunter that I'm going to be able to get away with this, or it's not going to come back to bite me, it's going to. You're going to get busted because of a noise or a smell, or you didn't have your stand up high enough, or whatever it was. Like, these little things are what are going to get you. So yeah, I really try to go through all my gear, see if I, like I said, need it or not, and if I do need it, I'm going to soundproof it, and that way I go out and I know I'm not going to make those noises, and I have eliminated one more thing that could potentially mess up my hunt, mess up my season, and hopefully give me an opportunity at a good deer.
Yeah, definitely. If we can control everything that we can control and
Right.
eliminate all those problems for sure. Now, how is this stuff as far as durability? Can it take a pretty good beating, and how's it hold up in the weather?
Yeah, and I'll address a question you asked, where not to put it. I wouldn't put it on anything that you really care about, like your grandpa's antique gun or something. It has a permanent adhesive. So once you get it on there, it's staying on there. And it holds up under weather. It's going to stick. I've had stuff on my sticks for about 4 years, and it's showing a little wear, but it's holding on good, and it's still doing its job type thing. So it's pretty durable. It depends on how you abuse your stuff, but it holds up well. It sticks well. 3 or 4 years in, you might think about changing it out, but it might last you more than that. So everything wears out, right? But it's pretty durable. Where I wouldn't put it would be, like I said, things you really care about because it's pretty permanent. And also, I would never tell people to put it on stuff they're going to be stepping on, just for the, you want a good, solid surface, and you don't want to be slipping potentially because it's something you put on, a step or something that you need a good, solid surface. So just for safety reasons, I'd stay away from stuff like that. But other than that, it pretty much can go wherever you need it.
Okay. Can you think of any successful hunts that you had, or maybe some of your clients had, that this stuff might have saved their butt?
Good question. I think since I've been using it, I'll just say this. So where I hunt is public land in Michigan, which, arguably is some of the toughest hunting probably around in the country. And I've had more encounters and more success since I've started paying attention to my sound and my gear and using this, all that stuff combined together. But I've had more encounters and success doing that by far than I did before. And so I kind of attribute my successes, since then to this. And just being really smart and detail-oriented with my hunting. And this is a key component of that. And there's other parts too, obviously. But I'd say in general, I've definitely noticed just having more encounters because, again, you're not giving the deer opportunities, or as many opportunities, to know that they're being hunted. One in particular, well, I'll say this, a couple of things. A couple of years ago, so 2018, I had a real good season in Michigan and Ohio, but my Michigan hunts, I think, kind of show, and it's a good example of why being really in tune with the sound you make and making sure that you have silence is just a key for you in hunting. So in 2018, on public land, October 13th, I shot a real nice 8-point. It was back in a lot of thick brush, and so your entry exit had to be really silent. I was able to get in there, and actually kind of weird, but that buck was almost like it was in rut. It was chasing a doe around all morning in that bedding area, and I was able to get him. But having a silent approach, being in and out of there silently, and my first time sit allowed me to be able to get that buck. 1 week later, same general area, found some hot sign, was able to go in, and one technique that definitely is important to use, and that I try to use as much as I can, is going in and setting stands if you have to when there's rain or high winds, and using that to mask your sound. So that was kind of the case, that I found a bunch of hot sign, some rubs coming from a field to a bedding area in a swamp, and a bunch of scrapes. There's this huge scrape line, probably every 20 yards, this buck, and I know multiple bucks were hitting these scrapes, and it was just a string of them. And so I set up at this pinch where kind of those things came together, back in, a thick area, but it was just open enough you could shoot. But I set it, and it was high winds that allowed me to get my stand set quietly. Nothing heard me. And I knew probably in the high winds that evening I wouldn't get anything, but if it calmed the next morning. And sure enough, I got in early, quietly, silently the next morning, and right after daybreak, a 9-point, 132-inch 9-point came through at 12 yards, and I got him. So I would attribute not just the product, but the overall attention to silence, making sure you're silent in your approach and your setup, and everything you do being key to both of those hunts from a couple years ago.
Now, Adam, I have a couple more questions on your product. Is there any sort of material that retains any scent on top of it, like some of the hockey tape would or whatever?
Right. The surface it's a really thin kind of cloth type material that is printed on.
Okay.
I don't think it really retains much scent. I've never had anything come up and sniff it or anything like that, so the surface of it kind of has like a seal over it that I think really helps with that. But yeah, I mean, guys should be careful with their scent, just like they would anything. But it isn't something that's absorbent of like water or scent from you. It just is sound absorbent, which is a different thing. It's sound deadening, I guess, maybe a better word to put it.
No, that makes sense. And I didn't notice anything that stuck out to me on my rolls of it I have here that looked, like hockey tape. After a while, that stuff will get wet and kind of mildewy. You know what I mean? So it's like, yours looked a lot more advanced in terms of that side of things. Now, when it comes to rolls, how many feet of this stuff come on a roll, and how wide is it?
Yeah, so the buck bumper, which is the thinner wrap that you can easily wrap, let's say like a climbing stick with, that comes in a 15-foot roll. And I think our website, we have it for $12.99. And that, so 15 feet, and we have a guide on our website that it's 3/4 inch wide, but 15 feet long. And you can figure out, if you want to, how much of your gear that'll cover. But just in general, if you think of a lone wolf climbing stick, one roll of that will cover an entire stick.
Okay.
Just to give you an idea. So it goes pretty far. And if you're doing multiple things, one of those will go pretty far. The buck bumper thick is 1 inch wide, and it's an 1/8 inch thick, so it's much thicker. And it's a 6-foot roll, but you're doing something different with that. Like I said, you're probably hitting contact points and using little strips of it here and there.
Yep.
like I put it on my climber a couple years ago on the metal exposed there. So you might be using a couple feet here and a couple feet there, but most of the time, I would suggest using that in little strips. Like, okay, I see my stand is making contact here with the seat. I'm going to put a couple strips, that's 2 inches here and 2 inches there, and you kind of spread that around.
Sure. And what camo pattern do you have on that buck bumper?
It's the sound barrier camo.
Nice.
It's nothing special. It's just kind of an open pattern that we developed. We didn't, people may or may not know this, but if you get a name brand camo pattern for clothing or, gear or whatever, you have to pay to use that. So we just came up with our own open pattern, which if you really start digging into a deer sight, actually, and this is a whole separate topic. I don't know if you guys have ever done a podcast on it, but deer sight is so different than our sight that the high definition patterns and stuff that are out there, that they don't really help like we think they do. Open pattern, just kind of big blocky patterns, which are becoming more popular now, are actually way better for camouflaging to a deer's eyeballs. So that's kind of what we came up with, our own little pattern that does the job.
Nice.
Yeah. So
now, speaking of deer senses, we've talked about the hearing a few times, how you guys studied that and did some tests. Tell us, how do deer hear? Like, what did you find that most people might not know about or not? And then I'd kind of like to hear about how those test results went at the university, like how you tested and what some of the measurements were, maybe to compare to some other things, if you want to get into that too.
Yeah, no, it is pretty interesting, and I was surprised by some things. And a little bit more about my background is I'm a science teacher, so I've been doing that for 18 years.
Nice.
So I have that background. I've taught physics for most of that time. So it was interesting, but it was kind of eye opening. And so just to kind of I'll compare it to human hearing, because that's what we're obviously familiar with. But deer hears similar in one way and different in three ways. Similarly, they hear loudness about the same, or we'll call it intensity of a sound. And that would be, something loud to us is also loud to them. Something soft to us is also soft to them. That's similar. The huge differences where they have a big advantage and why we need to be so careful about sounds. The first one is just their pinnae, or their outer ear, the big ear part that we see, the huge cone, and that just so much better than our hearing. It funnels sound to their eardrum. And unlike our ears, that are just stuck on our head, they can move those around. So they're big radar dishes that, they'll swivel around to pick up the slightest sounds and funnel them to their ears, and then hone in on the source of that sound to analyze it for danger or not. And, most people have probably seen this if they've observed deer at all and hunted much at all, that if you have some deer out in front of you and all of a sudden they all just snap their heads one way and their ears and start looking, a lot of times you won't know or hear what they're hearing. And then maybe a couple minutes later, another deer pops in the field or a hunter pops over the ridge. And that just is a good example of how well their ears pick up those little sounds, and also how well they can hone in on them. So that's a huge advantage they have. And a good example of that is if you've ever grunted a deer in or rattled a deer in, they can come from, a quarter mile away and run straight to the base of your tree just off of one grunt. And that just shows their ability not only to hear those sounds, but also pinpoint where they came from. And that's a huge thing. So if I make a noise accidentally that I don't want to make, you can bet that they know exactly where that came from too. And if they think, or associate it with maybe hunting, they're definitely avoiding that area. So that's one way.
Yeah,
Go
no,
ahead.
that makes sense. I mean, we always talk about that metal on metal clang being like an unnatural sound, right? Like they're
Right.
not used to hearing that in the woods. Nothing in the woods is metal that we didn't put there.
Right.
So, okay, I can see how that could be not an issue. Now, were you guys testing that type of thing in the lab down there in Toledo, or what were you guys finding was like some of the biggest? I think that I guess the furthest traveling sound probably is metal on metal.
Yeah. Well, I'll get to that in 1 second. So
Sure.
that was one way. The second way is where they hear better is what I call their sweet spot. And that's just the frequency range they hear best. And that is around 8,000 hertz. Now, that, might not be a big deal. Humans, compared to humans, is around 2,000 to 4,000 hertz, which is where kind of our speaking frequencies. So it makes sense that we hear that best, right? Interesting, when we tested those hunter sounds at Toledo University, we found that a lot of them peaked were the loudest at between 8 and 10,000 hertz, which is also where deer hear the best. So that was kind of an aha thing that, yeah, they hear really good in these, frequencies of the noises that we make, crunching leaves, clanging stuff. I'll go through the list in a bit here, but they are especially equipped to hear those sounds very well. And the third way is they have ultrasonic hearing, which just means above what we can hear. So humans, we can hear, at our best, like when we're younger and our hearing is the best, we can hear from about 20 to 20,000 hertz. And that's just the pitch or frequency range. Anything below or above that, we can't hear, right? So ultrasonic means they can hear well above our, highest hearing range of 20,000 hertz. And their range is all the way up to about 64,000 hertz, or 3 times as high as the pitch or frequency we can hear. So kind of like a dog whistle, we can't hear it. Dogs can. Deer are hearing these noise frequencies that we don't even know exist because we can't hear them. And, going to our studies, these things that we looked at, yes, they're making frequencies or noises in that ultrasonic range that we can't hear, but the deer can hear. And it's not that we won't hear the noise. Let's say it's being crunching leaves. I'll hear that, but the deer hear a much bigger picture of that, so to say. And that allows them, especially those high frequencies, that is what they use to help them pinpoint where the noise came from. So all those things together, about deer hearing, really make them, obviously, that very beneficial for them. And also, told me, we really need to, as hunters, and I need to, as a hunter, really need to focus on this area and everything I can do to, be quiet and be silent. So jumping to some of those sounds. So we did 30 sounds, and on our website, the guys actually have a chart up here. If anybody wants to look at it, they can kind of see what that looked like. But some of the stuff was like sawing a limb, plastic, like a plastic feed bag if you're out there, dumping bait somewhere, or clothing, brushing against brush, tree stand, metal contact, solid plastic contact, walking in grasses, dry grasses, breaking certain branches, oak and pine, tree steps, camera arm contact, and climbing stick contact. Those are just some examples of stuff that we tested. Walking in dry grass, for example. we found out this would be under calm conditions. The conditions are going to vary and determine how far a sound will actually carry, but assuming a calm day where, sounds travel fairly well, something, for example, like walking in dry grasses that are just kind of loud and crunchy, that could travel up to 250 yards.
Wow.
And a deer would hear that, right, and know that something's over there that probably doesn't sound like an animal, to them. Oak twig breaking. So medium-sized oak twig, you step on it, it crunches. That, if it snaps loud enough, could travel up to 500 yards. And deer hear that, right?
Wow.
Some of the major ones, like if you clang pretty decent, let's say you're setting up your stand or you're climbing sticks, that steel, metal on metal, it's hollow, right? So it's ringing out because of the hollowness. We got those on a calm day could travel over 1,000 yards.
Jeez.
And a half mile is 880 yards. So, and if you think about it, that might seem like, wow, is that real? Is that really the case? But, if you think about it, when you're out there hunting and it's a quiet night, you can hear things walking in leaves a long ways away. You can hear deer coming a long ways away in really dry leaves. And, I've been out hunting and the neighbors, the neighbor houses are half a mile away and they're out in their yard and you can hear them talking or whatever they're doing as clear as bell. So on the right days, yeah, sounds definitely carry pretty far and pretty well. And if we're making these noises, deer are hearing that, right? So, but that was pretty eye-opening for me, for us, as we looked at that. And again, just kind of with, how deer hear so well with, yeah, I'm making these noises. This is a problem, that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, that chart on your website, I think I'm on the home page here. Yeah, on the home page, if you scroll down at soundbarrierhunting.com, the common hunt busting noise carry distances. That is very interesting stuff, man. Wow.
Yeah, and like I said, if you've got a day that it's super windy, and it's raining, and that's why that's a great day to hang your stand or whatever you're going to do, because that is eliminating, that is, masking that sound that you could potentially make a mistake and make. And that's why that's so key. But normal days that you want to be out there hunting, it's not like that. So yeah, it really is eye-opening to see, and then be honest with yourself and say, okay, well, what do I need to change about my hunting to, give myself a better chance?
Yeah, throwing all the odds into your favor is something we take very seriously, whether it's, an ozonics unit or washing your clothes and keeping them in a scent-free tote, treating your boots with zeolite, all the stuff that we take very seriously on the scent side of things. Yeah, this is very interesting stuff. I mean, one metal clank, tree steps or camera arm, 1,000 yards. I believe that. I've heard my neighbors talking, down the block across the road for sure. So if we wanted to relate this to our habitat setups or some of the strategies that we're using on our properties, we plant screens or, cut bedding areas, drop trees, access is super calculated. Do you actually use your access and think about the way the deer is hearing you as well instead of just seeing or smelling you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to factor all that in. And I would say you guys have way more experience with the food plots and all that, because I don't have a lot of land that I can do that in. But yeah, even whether you're hunting private land that's highly managed or you're hunting public that you can't really do a whole lot, you really have to think about, way before season starts, think about your sound impact, your sound footprint, so to say, and how you can minimize that. Whether it's your gear, soundproofing your gear, eliminating gear, to your entries and exits. How are you going to get in and out without them smelling you, seeing you, or hearing you? And so, yeah, you definitely have to plan that out. I'll plan it out with, if I'm going in and out of public, I'll plan it out not only, okay, I don't want my scent blowing into the bedding area or whatever, but also how can I get in and out of here the quietest and the furthest from deer, right? So mapping that out before you go in somewhere in public, let's say you're doing a, run and gun type hunt, thinking about that as well as all the other things is going to be important.
All right. Now, Adam, I know we like to ask our listeners this specific question. I'm going to make it a little bit different for you as well.
Okay.
We always ask about what your favorite tree is for hunting or habitat, or you just like looking at it in the woods, whatever it is. But I kind of want to know what your quietest recommended tree would be too, in terms of sound and climbing up it and all that good stuff. So kind of a two-part question for you.
Okay. Well, I'd say a good tree, or one of my favorite trees, has to be a white oak tree. That's probably a popular answer, but just, when they're dropping acorns, it's like a magnet for deer. It's good. If you can find a stand of those, or even just one that is in, an isolated area, deer seem to just pour into those. So that's a good spot to hunt. As far as quietest, just looking at the bark, I think about when I use a climber, if I've got a tree that has a lot of shaggy bark or something, that is just super noisy. So something like a maple that's a pretty smooth bark, or a beech tree, those are pretty quiet for climbing, and setting up. That's just something to think about, and, stay away from stuff like hickory trees that have that really hard, scaly bark that just, it's just super noisy. So if you can, sometimes you can't pick your tree. You just got to get in the best one. But if you can, that's what I would do.
No, those are some great answers. I know I've climbed up some scaly bark trees, like a big red pine or something, where the bark looks to peel off, and it seems like it's just falling on the climber platform and everything else. But no, that's good advice. I haven't heard the answer to that. I thought you might have said some sort of pine, but actually the bark is a little thicker on those. So I think the thinner bark of like the maple or the beech, like you said, would be a better option.
Yeah, it's quieter, it seems to be.
Well, hey, man, I really appreciate you coming on. If anybody hasn't seen on Facebook yet or Instagram, we announced that you are a new partner of the podcast. So really appreciate you jumping on board with that. And we want to, hear where we can find your blog, your products, and you even got a little something for the listeners. So go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, well, thanks for it's good to be partnering with you guys. And yeah, if guys want to check us out, go to soundbarrierhunting.com, and the homepage gives a lot of the information we talked about, like the hunting noise carry distances of common hunter noises, and there's a video and some different things they can look at there to see the product and see it in use. Then they can easily click on the shopping page and go there and see our different packages. They can look at, for a given purpose, get a little information about how many rolls they might need and how much something will cover. They can find out all that information there. And also we have a blog that I publish every couple weeks. That's some of it is on deer hearing, so they can find an article about that there, and I might send you a link to that if you want. But there's a lot of different just whitetail articles in general. they can get a lot of information from there. They can sign up for that if they want to receive that every couple weeks, and just kind of noodle around the site. And I think it find a lot of helpful information.
Yeah, I've read your blog a bunch of times. I think, people send out emails from websites, every day. You get them in your inbox and whatnot. But yours are pretty interesting. You're a lot, you're from Michigan like I am, and you have the need to chase after these big boys like I do. So it's kind of more, hits home hearing about these nice birds and bucks that you're after on that blog. So I enjoy doing that. Keep that up.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. And you also mentioned that prior that we have a discount for Habitat Podcast listeners. Is that correct?
Yep. If they make an order through our website, the code HP, just type that in and they'll get 10% off as well as free shipping. So take advantage of that. If you're going to order something and soundproof your gear this season, code HP, and you get that 10% off.
Oh, that's awesome, man. We really appreciate you doing that for us and the listeners. And like we talked about in this episode, guys, it's a lot to take in with how a deer and its hearing can really affect you. But these extra details are what puts that buck on the wall or that meat in the freezer. So, Adam, thanks so much for coming on. And guys, we'll be hearing more from Adam in the future. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Adam, for coming on the show tonight. My mind is still trying to absorb all that information on how deer hear and all the testing you guys did. And I'd love to point more people to your website to check out your test results that are on your homepage there. It's very interesting stuff, guys. I was looking at it during the show. Check out soundbarrierhunting.com. You got HP for a code HP. Get you 10% off and free shipping. And just thank you, Adam, and thanks to the listeners for coming on today. We really appreciate you guys. I want to thank the rest of our partners. We have Packer Max Cultipackers, HuntWise, Killer Food Plots. Use code HP 10% at Killer Food Plots. 52 Outdoors, Michigan Whitetail Pursuit, The Habitat Hook, and Stony Creek Realty. Be sure to watch out probably August for our next Stony Creek Habitat Podcast live trivia on Facebook. That was a blast again this past week. Had a really good time doing it. And then we're going to launch another journal entry on the Habitat Journal on habitatpodcast.com regarding deer anatomy, arrow placement, studying where you can put a safe arrow shot. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you all for supporting the Habitat Podcast once again. We'll be back next week with Lincoln Roan and another great episode. Hang in there as we become better habitat managers.